The First World War dragged on for 4 relentless years and left more than 10 million soldiers dead. Entire cities were shattered, empires collapsed. But in that ocean of blood, one question lingers. Which single day was the deadliest of them all? The answer isn't what most people think, and it forces us to confront just how brutal the so-called war to end all wars truly became. Between 1914 and 1918, fighting exploded not just in the trenches of France and Belgium, but across Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and the vast oceans. On average, every single day of that conflict swallowed 6,700 men. Day after day, month after month, years with no pause, like a machine grinding civilization to dust. But averages hide the truth. Some days passed in uneasy quiet, both sides exhausted, staring across no man's land through drifting smoke. Other days erupted into pure slaughter, tens of thousands cut down in just a few hours. We remember names like Passchendaele, Verdun, Tannenberg, and of course, the infamous first day of the Somme. But can we actually pinpoint the bloodiest day? History makes that harder than it sounds. Each nation kept its own records, roll calls of killed, wounded, and missing. Staff officers tried to track the cost of every assault and every trench lost. Yet many of these documents were flawed or vanished entirely. German archives burned in 1945, Russian files scattered or destroyed in the chaos of revolution. Different formats, different counting methods, sometimes totals, lumped together over several days. The deeper historians dig, the messier it gets. So, instead of searching for one exact date where all armies suffered the most, something the data simply can't confirm, we shift the lens. We ask a clearer question: on which single day did one nation suffer its worst losses of the entire war? And here is where the story takes a surprising turn, because even the most widely known contender now looks wrong. Let's begin with the date etched into British memory like a national scar, 1st of July 1916, the beginning of the Battle of the Somme. Britain had entered the war in 1914 with a small professional force, the old Contemptibles. But by 1916, the country had transformed. Hundreds of thousands of volunteers, eager to serve, had filled the ranks: miners, clerks, footballers, factory hands, men who had never imagined themselves in uniform. Now, they stood ready to launch the largest British offensive of the war, attacking alongside their exhausted French allies on the River Somme. Originally, the French were meant to carry much of the burden, but the German onslaught at Verdun changed everything. France was bleeding out there, calling for Britain to step up, immediately. The British High Command placed its faith in a new idea. Artillery would win the battle before infantry even left their trenches. For 7 days, the skyline was nothing but fire. More shells were fired in that bombardment than the British Army had used in the entire Boer War. Commanders boasted that not even a rat could survive in the German lines. So the plan was simple, too simple. When the whistles blew, British troops were told to walk across no man's land in neat waves, expecting to find nothing but bodies and shattered earth ahead. Victory, they believed, would be a formality, but nothing about the Somme would go according to plan. At 7:30 in the morning on July 1st, 1916, the whistles shrieked along the British line. Thousands of men, Britain's new volunteer army, climbed out of the trenches and marched forward into a storm, but the German defences were far from destroyed. The British bombardment had failed in the worst possible way. Cheap fuses meant many shells simply didn't explode. German concrete bunkers, buried deep beneath the chalk and reinforced with steel, had shielded entire companies of defenders. They waited, listening, until the moment came. As British troops advanced in straight-lined formations across no man's land, the Germans rose from the darkness and unleashed machine gun fire into open ranks. The attack that was meant to be a triumphant breakthrough instantly turned into a massacre. In some sectors, units were shattered before they even reached the enemy wire. Others actually made it into the German trenches, only to find themselves trapped, cut off, no communication, artillery falling behind them, rifles jamming with mud and blood. One Scottish soldier later recalled the nightmare after his own assault collapsed. "We tried to fall back through a communication trench, but the ground exposed us. I soon realized I was the only one still living there. I found my officer, Lieutenant McBrain, shot through the skull. Of the rest of my platoon, I saw only bodies. What little the British gained on that first day paled next to the French success further south, and came at a horrific price. In just 24 hours, 19,240 British soldiers were killed, 38,000 more were wounded. It was, and remains, the deadliest single day in the entire history of the British Army. And the killing didn't stop. The Battle of the Somme dragged on for another 4.5 months. Trenches shifted by meters, sometimes by mere yards, but never again would one day consume so many British lives as that first sunrise. That is why the Somme occupies such a powerful place in British memory. Entire streets of young men, PALS battalions, were erased before lunch. Villages lost every son they sent. A century later, thousands still walk those fields in silence, trying to comprehend the scale of the loss. And yet, July 1st, 1916 was not the deadliest day of the First World War, not even close. Other nations suffered days so catastrophic that even the Somme is overshadowed. To find the true record breakers, we must look far beyond the British sector. The smaller nations of the British Empire suffered their own days of horror as well. Newfoundland, then still a separate dominion, was annihilated on that very same morning at the Somme. The Royal Newfoundland Regiment went over the top near Beaumont-Hamel, and 85% of its men were killed or wounded within minutes. An entire generation from that tiny country was lost before breakfast. For Australia, the worst trauma came just weeks later, on the 19th of July, 1916, at a place many have never heard of, Fromelles. A single Australian division suffered 2,000 dead in one night, men hurled against deeply fortified German positions in a diversionary assault that achieved absolutely nothing. Canada's bloodiest 24 hours came during one of its proudest victories, Vimy Ridge, April 9, 1917. The Canadians captured the heights in a brilliantly coordinated attack, but it cost them around 2,400 dead before the first day ended. Triumph came hand in hand with tragedy. But what about Germany? For the German army, the deadliest day came far later, in the spring of 1918, when the Kaiser's generals launched one final gamble to break the Allies before American manpower arrived in strength. With Russia now defeated and fresh divisions transferred west, Germany unleashed Operation Michael, the opening strike of the spring offensive. The plan was daring: smash the seam where the British and French armies met, tear the Allies apart, and force Britain back to the Channel. For the first time on such a scale, Germany deployed stormtroopers, elite assault units trained to slip through weak points, bypass strongholds, and plunge deep into the rear. The results were dramatic and costly. On March 21st, 1918, the very first day of the offensive, around 11,000 German soldiers were killed, many of them irreplaceable veterans. Lieutenant Ernst Junger, who survived more battles than most men even saw, recalled a moment when death missed him by inches. Waves of infantry appeared like ghosts through the white smoke. A machine gun opened up unexpectedly. We threw ourselves into a shell hole, and a shrapnel blast erupted over our heads. It was a miracle we were alive. The offensive carved huge dents into the British lines and sent Allied command into panic. But Germany lacked the reserves to exploit its own success. After 2 frantic weeks, the attack stalled, and the chance for victory died with thousands of its best troops. Other armies suffered days so chaotic that exact figures may never be known. For Italy, 2 contenders stand out. At Caporetto, on October 24, 1917, German and Austro-Hungarian forces tore the Italian front wide open, routing entire armies and sending 500,000 Italians retreating in collapse. Another grim possibility, June 29, 1916, when Austro-Hungarian troops launched a massive phosgene gas attack on Monte San Michele. Around 3,000 Italians died, and another 4,000 were poisoned, including their own allies who failed to get masks on in time. Despite this, the front barely shifted an inch. Austria-Hungary's worst day is even harder to pinpoint. Their early offensives were a disaster from the start. In August 1914, they blundered into Galicia, straight into well-prepared Russian armies, and were mauled so badly that the empire never fully recovered. Another candidate, February 27, 1915, deep in the frozen Carpathians. Starving, exhausted Austro-Hungarian troops, already bled white, tried to storm Russian positions in blizzard conditions. Their second and third armies reported 40,000 men missing in a single day. Many were killed in battle. Many more simply froze to death where they fell. A third option, June 4th, 1916, the opening of the Brusilov offensive, the hammer blow that shattered Austria-Hungary's fighting strength for good. On the Eastern Front, the scale of bloodshed becomes even harder to grasp. Russian record-keeping collapsed under the pressure of revolution and retreat, and many military archives were lost forever. Historians know that days during the Gorlick-Tarnów offensive in 1915, when the Central Powers smashed through Galicia and drove the Russians out of Poland, likely saw hundreds of thousands of casualties over just a few weeks. Another contender lies in 1916, in the ferocious opening of the Brusilov offensive, when entire Russian corps were torn apart in hours. But without reliable numbers, the exact deadliest day for Russia is buried under the snow of history. France, however, leaves no doubt about the price it paid. No major power suffered a higher percentage of military deaths than France in the First World War, and nowhere were those losses felt more brutally than in the first terrible weeks of 1914, when the French army, attacking along the German border with almost no British support, ran headfirst into the full might of the Kaiser's war machine. This disaster became known as the Battle of the Frontiers, a swirling storm of assaults and counterattacks from Belgium to Alsace between the 20th and the 23rd of August 1914. The Germans, advancing according to the Schlieffen Plan, unleashed devastating artillery fire that pulverized French attacks and sent entire divisions reeling backward. French soldier Georges Vaux remembered the moment his unit walked into hell. The firing grew into a fury, then suddenly died away. The Germans vanished behind a rise, and the heights above exploded into lightning. Their artillery hammered us. Shrapnel burst everywhere across the plain. It wasn't courage that failed, it was everything else. The Germans had heavy guns, better fire support, and a ruthless defensive plan. France had bright uniforms, outdated tactics, and paid in blood for both. For decades, historians believe 22nd August 1914 was not only France's darkest day, but the single deadliest day in the entire war. 27,000 French soldiers killed in just 24 hours. A slaughter so immense that it scarred France for generations. But even that number was wrong. During the centenary in 2014, the French government digitized the death cards of all 1.4 million French soldiers, a massive online archive called Mémoire des Hommes. When researchers re-examined the data, the estimate was revised downward. The real figure still defies comprehension. Around 21,000 French deaths on a single day, 22nd August 1914. One sunrise, 21,000 dead. Entire regiments simply erased from the map before most countries had even grasped that the war had begun. And yet, even that day, the worst in France's proud but tragic wartime history, was not the deadliest day of the First World War. To find the true peak of industrial slaughter, we must look south to a fortress city on the Meuse River, to the most infamous killing ground of them all, Verdun. Even after the re-evaluation of August 22nd, the numbers remain horrific. But if the British Somme disaster wasn't the worst single day, and neither was France's early bloodbath, then which day truly stands at the top of this gruesome list? To understand that, we need to look at 1915, the deadliest year of the war for France. By then, Britain's army was still expanding, unready for major offensives. Russia was being hammered back in the east. Italy's new front against Austria-Hungary went nowhere, and at Gallipoli, the Allied invasion collapsed into another slaughter. That left France carrying the full weight of the Western Front, with nowhere near enough shells, guns, or fresh reserves to do it. Through spring and summer, the French launched repeated attacks in Artois, even momentarily taking Vimy Ridge with North African troops, but the Germans always clawed it back. General Joseph Joffre tried to justify the constant assaults as nibbling the enemy to death. For ordinary French soldiers, it felt like hitting a stone wall with bare hands. Still, hope flared again when the High Command promised a great breakthrough in autumn. Joffre stirred his exhausted men with bold words. "Soldiers of the Republic, the hour has struck. Your elan will be irresistible. You will break their lines and chase them to their guns." On the 25th of September 1915, the promise was put to the test. After 3 days of deafening bombardment, 500,000 French infantry surged out of their trenches across Champagne, the largest offensive France had attempted so far. In some sectors, the guns had done their work. German wire lay shredded, trenches smashed, stunned defenders hauled from the ruins. Sous-Lieutenant Jean Duclos remembered those first desperate moments. Your chest tightens before climbing the parapet. And then a shout, "Forward!" We run through yellow grass, bayonets glinting, bullets kick dust at our heels, but we keep running. But elsewhere, German resistance stiffened instantly. Their heavy machine guns found perfect lanes of fire. Gas shells burst among the survivors, choking those who had already dodged steel. A German corporal, Oswald Eichler, recalled the chaos on his side. Gas shells rained down. We pulled on masks and rushed toward the trench line. Blue-helmeted French were already on us, grenades exploding at arm's reach. The attack lurched forward in bloody confusion. Sections of the German line fell, only for counterattacks to sweep them clean again. Communications failed, artillery fell short, and by nightfall, thousands of French soldiers lay dead in no man's land, their long-awaited breakthrough nowhere in sight. What happened on September 25, 1915 is the key. As more French records were digitized for the war's centenary, researchers discovered a grim truth. That day, the opening of the Second Battle of Champagne saw more French soldiers killed than any other 24-hour period of the war. Not August 1914, not Verdun, not the Somme. September 25th, 1915 was the single deadliest day of the First World War for any nation. A day when hope and optimism collided head-on with machine-gunned reality. In Champagne, the opening blow did achieve something France had not seen since 1914, a real rupture in the German line. Across a 12-kilometer sector, French infantry punched through, capturing trenches and thousands of dazed German prisoners. Some of the most successful units fought with a glimpse of the future, better coordination with artillery, gas shells used to suffocate strongpoints, fresh reserves brought forward quickly, and grenades hurled in swarms to clear bunkers. The terrible lessons of the early war were finally reshaping French tactics. Others, however, still clung to the old ways. The 5th Hussars were told the trenches ahead were already in French hands. They lowered lances, drew sabres and charged, cavalry galloping straight toward machine gun fire in 1915. The result was a scene out of a fading era. Hussars dismounted, leaping into the enemy trench, shooting and striking down resistance. German soldiers, terrified, emerged with their hands raised. 2 machine guns that had halted French infantry were finally silenced, but the price was predictably savage. 140 horses lay dead in a single useless charge. The 2nd Zouaves, elite colonial infantry, lost over 1,100 men just to cross a mere 200 meters of open ground. Any foothold was paid for in blood. Meanwhile, on the very same day, the 25th of September 1915, another hammer blow was falling further north. The French launched the Third Battle of Artois, while the British attacked at Loos, hoping to stretch German reserves thin. French soldiers advanced toward Vimy Ridge, again, this time under torrents of cold rain. But hope drowned quickly. Shell shortages meant German wire remained uncut, machine guns untouched, bunkers intact. Second Lieutenant Robert Desoblieux watched the catastrophe unfold. The French assault forced to run across a field already carpeted with the corpses of December 1914. There is still wire, that deadly obstacle no man crosses under fire. A sergeant falls beside me, clutching his stomach. His intestines spill into the mud. He cries like a child, but the other wounded do not even look at him. They think only of saving themselves. Small advances were taken and lost. The French did not even reach the ground they had gained months earlier. The assault in Artois failed to break through. The attack in Champagne began to stall, and the dead were piling up faster than any officer could count. This day is where the numbers finally collide with human limits. The modern research is clear. 25th of September, 1915. The deadliest single day of the First World War for any army. A day when France hurled more than 500,000 men into battle and watched them fall in their thousands before noon. No glorious breakthrough, no turning point, just a nation bleeding itself white to stop the Germans from winning. Foch kept the attacks in Artois going into mid-October, determined not to signal weakness to the British nor to allow the Germans a moment to regroup. but every shell fired in the north was a shell taken away from Champagne, where the fate of the offensive still hung by a thread. In reality, that thread was already close to snapping. The first day's progress, those few torn kilometers of churned earth and broken trenches, began to lure the French high command into a deadly illusion. Senior officers convinced themselves that a breakthrough must be imminent. Unit after unit was hurled forward into narrowing corridors of fire, and every reinforcement sent into the battle simply fed the furnace. Sous-Lieutenant Jean Duclos found himself in that furnace, trapped in a captured German position as the ground around him came alive with unseen guns. Invisible machine guns wake up and bullets flood around us like a swarm of bees, he remembered. Men fall all around me. Suddenly I feel a violent blow to my face, blood pours down. A bullet has taken the tip of my nose. For Duclos, and for countless others, there was no strategy left, only survival, rage, confusion, and the sickening realization that the promise of victory had dissolved into yet another hillside of corpses. By 14th October, Joffre finally called off the attacks. The autumn campaign had produced no decisive breakthrough, and French troops were still unable to turn a captured trench into an open road forward. The riddle of modern trench warfare remained unsolved. The French could storm the first line, they could seize the parapet, they could kill the defenders, but somewhere beyond that initial success, the advance always stalled. The army lacked the heavy artillery to shatter deeper defenses, lacked the communication systems to direct the chaos, and lacked the refined infantry tactics that would not fully emerge until 1917. What they did have, in seemingly inexhaustible supply, was human lives, and they spent them freely. The twin offensives in Artois and Champagne defined 1915 as France's most terrible year of the war. Tens of thousands were wounded, tens of thousands were killed or simply vanished, their bodies lost to the mud. In Artois alone, French blood soaked the ground at a rate that defies comprehension. Thousands of men for every tiny square of terrain gained, a price so horrific that it threatened the army's ability to continue fighting at all. And among all the days that filled that dreadful year, one stands above the rest as the deadliest, not just for France, but for any army in the First World War. September 25th, 1915, the opening day of the double offensive, the morning when 500,000 French soldiers climbed out of their trenches and vanished into sheets of rain, smoke, and hurricane fire. For decades, this day was overshadowed by better-known horrors, the Somme, Verdun, Passchendaele. But thanks to extensive digitization of French records during the war's centenary, historians have been able to look deeper, name by name, card by card, and the truth has emerged with stark finality. Around 23,000 French soldiers were killed that day. Not wounded, killed. Many died before midday. Many more died alone in the shell holes overnight, their final cries unheard. It is, as far as the evidence allows, the bloodiest 24 hours any nation endured in the entire Great War. There is a cold irony in this revelation. The deadliest day of the First World War is not the one etched into British memory. It is not the French date most schoolchildren learn. It is not a moment of decisive triumph or heroic defense. It took no famous city. It produced no legendary line like "They shall not pass." It changed nothing in the strategic balance of the war. It is simply the day the machinery of industrial conflict reached full speed and crushed the lives of over 20,000 men into the soil of Champagne. Their names are rarely spoken, their battlefield is rarely visited, their sacrifice is rarely remembered outside the quiet archives where their death cards lie, but they were the ones who died on the deadliest day. Today, the Third Battle of Artois and the Second Battle of Champagne are barely remembered, not in classrooms, not in documentaries, not even in France. Their names are absent from war memorials, from public memory, from the grand narrative we've built around the Great War. We speak of the Somme, we speak of Verdun. These have become the symbols of sacrifice, of futility, of heroism. But symbols can lie, because the deadliest day of all, the moment when the First World War reached its most brutal climax, came not during a legendary stand or a decisive turning point, but in battles that most people have never even heard of, battles that are not taught, not filmed, not mourned. And in that silence lies the true tragedy. History isn't made only by the moments we remember, it's made just as much by the ones we forget. And among the 10 million who died, there were 23,000 who fell on a single September morning. in a place we no longer speak of, fighting for a breakthrough that never came.